Hello, today we're going to talk about the overlocker. And the first thing we're going to deal with is threading, because that's what people mostly fear. So I've got two overlockers here at the moment, the Bonina and the Elna. They are slightly different, which is nice because then I can show some things that are different as we go along. And what you will notice is that I've threaded both machines with different colors. So basically I'm correlating the color of the thread to the color of the dots, so yellow, green, blue and red. And the first thing to make sure when you're threading is that this guy is at its highest point. So on both of them I have this at its highest point. And when you thread the machines, they are different. So sewing machine overlockers are all slightly different on the inside, so it's very good to find the manual for your specific machine and work from that. And even if you can, the YouTube video, because I'm not going to show you how to do the difficult part of the threading because these two machines are different. And basically, sorry, let me just put that back down to there. What we're going to look at is the tension of the threading. So say that you've threaded your machine now and you want to set it up so that it's ready to sew. We want to look at the different tensions and also which thread sews where. So the reason why I have threaded the machines like I have is so that we can look at what sews where. So I've sewn on my piece of fabric over here and you can see the different colors. So when I sewed this, I sewed it in the machine like that. So this is the top and this is the bottom. So you will notice that overlocking has a top and a bottom, and the top side does look prettier than the bottom side. And if I look carefully, I'll see this thread here is blue. Okay, so that's the one that comes from here. So this guy is the one that sews on top, and the red one is the one that sews at the bottom. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly describe a little bit more about the top and the bottom thread. So I just said that the red one is at the bottom and the blue one's at the top. So if I look inside my machine here, I've got these two loopers. So that's looper number 1, looper number 2. And you'll see that the red one is actually below the blue one. So this one is the one that's sewing on top, and this one is the one that's sewing on the bottom. So that's very important to know, so that when you have problems, it's not like, oh my gosh, which thread is it? It's the bottom thread or it's the top thread, or it's the two needles. So those are the needle threads. Okay, so those ones are the yellow and the green, and they are the ones that make these two lines here. Okay, so you have the blue and the red going up and down, and then you have the yellow and the green next to that, and those ones are the needle threads. And looking next to it, you will see my machine has an illustration of which threads you need to thread first, second, third and fourth. This is very important to follow, otherwise things get muddled up. So when you're threading your machine, make sure that you follow that and always follow it like that. It's very important to also thread your machine so that you are confident that if anything goes wrong, you don't get this panicky feeling and think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to carry on because I've got this all wrong, or because a thread broke and I can't rethread it. Try and practice rethreading it till a point that you feel confident that you're not scared of something going wrong. Because if you're scared of something going wrong, then chances are you probably won't even use your machine. So really take time just to thread it and thread it and thread it. Once again, the most difficult one on this machine is the blue one. It's actually the red one. Because of the way that it has to go behind the back, and that's just something you need to learn. On my machine I do have a little button that helps me, it depends on your machine. This little white guy helps me to lift something down and push it back up so that it helps the threading process. But get used to threading your machine. It's something you just have to get over, and it really will help you in future. Okay, so carrying on with tension. So on this little piece of fabric that I sewed here, you can see, so my tension was all correct here. I hope you can see it properly. Why is it not focusing? Oh, there we go. Okay, so you can see that everything looks pretty, and if I look on the back, everything looks quite neat. Nothing looks like it's pulling. And on the edge, you can see that the blue and the red meet nicely on the edge. Where is it? Let me focus. There we go. The blue and the red meet nicely on the edge. So basically what's happening here is the blue one is not pulling the red one, the red one's not pulling the blue one. They're both meeting on the edge here. And the same with the two needle threads. They're not pulling either of them. They're at the back here, you can just see the green and just see the yellow, which is what you want. They're not pulling either of them and pulling too tight. And if I do open it up over here, I can also see that my stitching is quite tight. I'm not getting teeth. So everything is correct on this piece of fabric. So now I'm going to show you the different ones and which one is too loose and which one is too tight. Okay, so on this sample, I'm going to look very carefully, and what's happened here is my blue is too loose. So the blue is going over to the back, and it's not sitting nicely on the edge. So I need to make the blue thread slightly looser, slightly tighter. So this one, I will be making tighter. The blue one will be made tighter on this sample. On this sample, the red is too loose, so I will be making the red one tighter so that it pulls itself back into place so that it can meet on the edge of the fabric. On this one, the blue is too tight, so you can see that it's pulling the red over the wall and it's pulling the yellow as well. It's really, 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 really tight, so it's pulling everything. The blue one is pulling everything together there. I can see that it's not, because it's pulling the yellow out of the holes there, it's actually pulling it that way, in that direction, and it's pulling the red in this direction, so the blue is pulling all the threads into the middle. So then I know that it's the blue one that is, so basically the top looper that is way too tight and it's pulling everything out of shape. Okay, and on this sample, if I look at the back, I can see that the red is too tight. Again, the red is pulling, you can see it's pulling the yellow out and it's pulling the blue over the front to the back. So the bottom looper, the red one, is too tight. So I need to loosen it in order to balance that out. Okay, now we're going to look at the tension on the two needles. So on this one, my yellow, which is the needle on my left, is too loose. So you can actually see that it's not sitting nice and tight. It's not sitting flat against the fabric. And if I open my fabric up like that, you'll see it's making very big teeth. And even on the back, you can see it's not, the yellow is making little loops like that. So it's actually not, the yellow is not pulling, oh, why is it not focusing? The yellow is not pulling hard enough or not pulling tight enough to pull itself into its place. So here I would need to make the yellow tension tighter, and that is my needle, which is on the left. The right needle is a little bit more difficult to see because it's kind of in the middle here. So that's the green thread. So if you do look carefully here, you'll see that the thread is loose. So if I do that with my nail, I can actually see that the thread is loose. And if I look on the back as well, you can see that you can actually see the green little dots here where normally you couldn't. You can actually see them, they're quite loose there. So that means I need to make my needle tension on the right hand side needle tension needs to be tighter in order to fix that. Okay, on this sample, the yellow needle, the one on the left, is too tight. So you can actually see that it's puckering my fabric. Can you see how it's pulling the fabric in? Which is like with a normal sewing machine, if something's too tight, it will pucker. And if I look closely, I can see that the red is actually coming through. So the yellow thread is so tight that it's actually pulling the red thread up to the front, which I don't want. I want to just be able to see the yellow thread. So on this one, my green needle thread is too tight, so the one on the right hand side. It is a little bit difficult once again to see when the green thread is too loose or too tight because it's right in the middle. But my indicator here is the fact that I can see those little red dots coming through, which means that the green is pulling the red thread, the bottom thread, up. So then I know that that one is too tight. So then I'll have to adjust my right hand needle. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is your stitch length. So just like a normal sewing machine, you can get different stitch lengths. On my machine, this is indicated by this button over here. So those are the stitch lengths. So that goes from 1 up until number 4. So normally it does have a little guide. So 2.5 would be the normal stitch length that I will keep my machine on. I don't really change that, so you shouldn't need to. But just as an example, so here I started stitching on my 2.5, and then I went to 4, so you can see the stitches go further apart, and then I went back down to 1, and there the stitches are very, very, very close together, which is not really ideal. So that's basically just your stitch length and how to adjust that. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about the differential feed. So the differential feed is indicated on this machine on the side here. It actually has a little thingy over here that says diff, so DIF, differential feed. And if you look closely, you will see that it has a little thing on it. Oopsie, sorry, let me do that. So there it looks like it's pulling in, and there it looks like it's stretching out. Okay, and then on this machine, it's a little bit different, so I'll show you on this machine. Basically, there's my differential feed, so it's right on the front. It also says DF. And the difference on this one is this one goes from 0.5, 1, 1.5 to 2. So normally this is on this machine, the middle one, I always have it on 1. Some machines, the middle one is 0, and then it goes up and down from there. But I'm going to go back to this other machine, and this one actually has a little N, so that's the middle, it's showing N. And then it goes to 0.7, and it goes up till 2. Okay, so what does this do? So the differential feed, basically in the machine there's 2 plates, so that when the machine sews, the 2 plates move. And at one stage the one moves faster than the other one, so it pulls the fabric in, and then on the other one it moves slower, so it stretches the fabric. So basically I'll just quickly show you some samples. So this is the first sample that I did on the differential feed. So on this sample my differential feed was on the highest, so it was on the 2. Okay, and that's showing that it's stretching out, so it's stretching the fabric out, and you'll see that the stitches are quite big. But if I look at my tension over here, my stitch length, I didn't change the stitch length, so I know that this problem, this one here, is not the stitch length, it's the differential feed that I changed. So that's how you know if it's doing this, but this is 2.5, that this is the one that's wrong. And then on this one, I basically turned the differential feed down all the way to the 0.7, and here it's pulling the fabric, stretching the fabric out, which is why the stitches are smaller. So it's a little bit difficult to see on here. So I've done some other samples on this fabric, which is just normal t-shirt fabric. What's happening is this was on the highest one, and it's actually, sorry, let me show it from this side, it's actually pulling the fabric. So it's pulling the fabric closer to each other, which is fine if you're using a very thin fabric and you want the machine to actually gather the fabric, almost not gather it, but just pull it in a little bit. And then on this one, it stretched the fabric out. Okay, again, this sample, this looks okay, but I can see I wouldn't want my differential feed to be this. So here the differential feed was on the low, so it was on the 0.7, and the stitches are too close together, so I definitely want my differential feed to go up a little bit for this one. A better example of this is now here. This is on the rib fabric. There my differential feed was on the highest. Okay, so the stitches are very, very big. But on this one, you can see it was on the 0.7, and you can see how it stretched the fabric out. So when it's on the lower number, then it's stretching the fabric. And when it's on the higher number, then it's gathering the fabric in a little bit. So here it hasn't actually had a bad effect. Okay, I wouldn't want it on that, but this one looks okay. But this one I can see it's really, really wobbling quite a lot. So I'd probably change it to a little bit higher so that it doesn't wobble as much. Just remember that you can also iron this out. The very, very important thing to understand with this fabric, or with a fabric that's very stretchy, is that if your differential feed is too high, then it's not going to stretch properly. Okay, so you need to find the balance with it looking pretty and stretching. So sometimes when you're sewing on a stretch fabric, your fabric will come out like this because you actually do need it to stretch. And then you will go and take this to your ironing board now and iron it out so that it's not giving you such big waves. But it's very important that you always pull the fabric to make sure that it's actually stretching, because when you're wearing the garment, you want it to stretch. So that's when the differential feed comes into play. So normally when I sew something that is quite stretchy, I'm always below the naught, or below the middle, below the middle line, okay, so that I am getting a little bit of that stretch in. Okay, and then the last example is my viscose. So here you can see the viscose, the differential feed was on quite high, so it's pulling the viscose in. It's actually making a little bit of pucker, okay, where here it actually looks fine. There it's laying quite nice and beautiful. Obviously this differential feed was the smallest, so I wouldn't want it that tight, but that's just giving you an understanding of the differential feed and how it affects it. So mainly we're going to keep it on the naught, unless we are working with something and we find that we need to play with that a little bit. Normally you don't play with it, but that's just a little bit of an understanding of the differential feed. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about thread. So I've threaded the machine arm with this type of thread at the moment, so you can see they're all kind of the same size. But the normal threads or the other option are to use these big rolls of threads, but sometimes they can be quite expensive, and if you're just making something that's in an odd color, you don't want to go and buy 4 of these. So what you can do is you can just buy these ones, and if you still don't want to buy 4 of these ones, you can also only buy 3. I'll explain why. So I'm just going to cut these threads here in prep to change the thread color. So I'm cutting right close down because I'm going to tie this onto something else later. So I really want these threads to be nice and long so that I can tie them onto something else just now. So you will have got some of these things with your overlocker. These can be used for 2 different things. So for one, when you put them on here and you have these cones, so these are quite big cones and they've got quite a big hole at the bottom, it just stops them from rattling around so much. So that's the one use for these plastic guys. And the other use is now, say that you've got, okay, let me just take those off. Okay, say that you need to sew something in white. I'm just using white as an example, but say I didn't want to buy 4 white threads, so I just buy 3, and the reason being is I'm going to use 2 big ones on my overlocker, and I need another big one for my sewing machine. So what I'll do is I'll put the 2 big ones on this one and this one. These are my looper threads. I'll show you just now, but these are the ones that go at the back. These are the looper ones. And then where the threads are that go into my needle, I've just filled 2 bobbins. Okay, so I'm going to use bobbins for my needle thread. Now the reason I'm putting the bobbins on these guys is because if I put the bobbin just like that, the thread wraps around the shaft like that, and then it gets stuck. So you need to lift the bobbin up by putting one of these guys there. Now I've lost some of mine, so basically if I can't find them, I just use another thread so that it just needs to lift. You need to lift the bobbin threads up. You can't have them down. So if you don't have one of these, you can just put an actual thread there so that you've got this lifted up, so that it doesn't cause problems when you're actually sewing. Okay, so I'm going to now tie my threads on so that I can pull my threads through, which is one method of changing the color. So when I tie my threads on, I'm going to take the thread and I'm going to put the 2 threads next to each other like that. Okay, so I've got both threads next to each other, and then I'm going to make a knot. Just move this up a little bit. Whoops, sorry. Then I'm going to make a knot like that. So I'm pulling it through that little hole there and pulling it tight. Okay, that's the safest knot that won't break. Now I don't want to pull that, have this long tail there because he's going to get caught. So I cut him short, cut him right off, and then I pull the thread down. So I don't want the thread to still be caught up like that. I need it to be nice and flat. So it's pulled down like that. So let me show you one more time. I'll show you with the red guy now. With the yellow one. So I've got my yellow thread and I've got my white thread, and I put the 2 together. So they are together like that. Okay, and then I make a knot. So I'm going to go around like that and push this guy through so that I have a nice knot. Sorry about the dog licking himself in the background. Like that, and then I'm going to cut just below the knot, this extra little tail off, and pull this down like that. And I'll go and do that with all of my threads, and then I'm ready to show you how how to pull the threads through. Okay, so I've tied all my threads on. As you can see, they're all tied on nicely, and I pulled them so that they're all hanging nice and straight. Now we're going to pull the threads through so that I have my machine now on white thread. Okay, so this that I want to show you now is very important, and it really makes this whole process quite easy. So I'm going to show you on both machines just so that you can get a good idea of what I'm doing. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I want to pull the thread through, and the easiest is, so basically with an overlocker I can't just pull these because it's in a knot, because that's the way that the stitch is. So I can't just pull this, it won't come through. So I need to separate the threads. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift my needles up, okay, and I need to pull the needle threads out. So if you think of this as it's like a chain and it's all been sewn together, I want to pull the needle threads out. So I'm going to pull these ones. I'm going to gently hold this tail and I'm going to pull these ones. Okay, if you don't have nails, you can use a tweezer or whatever. But I don't want to let go of the looper threads. Okay, so the yellow and the green. So I must hold this gently, but not hold it tight enough that I'm actually holding these threads. Otherwise I can't pull it out. So you're gently holding it so that these threads are left behind and then these threads are out. So now what I'll do is I'll pull these two first and then I'll pull those two. Okay, so on this machine, I'm quite lucky because it has a little button at the back which releases the tension. So there's a button, so I just lift a lever at the back here, and that releases the tension. Okay, because when I pull my threads through here, those little knots that I've made there are going to go through my tension discs, and that in time will damage my machine. Okay, so I need to release them in order to pull it through. So when I pull my threads through, I'm holding this guy up, okay, and then I don't need to change my tension, I'm just holding him up, and I will pull these ones until I see the white. So gently pull them through till the white comes, and I'll pull the bottom one. Okay, sometimes you get stuck. This one got stuck a little bit. Okay, so I'm pulling these two until I see my white, and then I'll simply cut these threads off, and all I need to do then is rethread my needles, and then my machine will be on a different color with the same tension that I have been sewing with the whole time. Okay. Another thing that's very, very important is to check that your thread is through the tension disc. So there are discs here. Some machines are slightly different. So sometimes what you need to do is you actually need to pull the thread on either side. So what I'll do here is I'll hold the thread at the top here and at the bottom, and I'll pull to make sure that they go right in there. So it's like flossing. The tension disc, they must be right in those discs. So you pull quite hard. Let me just move this a little bit out of the way. So you pull like that on both sides. You can do that on all of them to make sure that the thread is inside that tension disc. Otherwise, when you start playing with your tension, you'll make this higher and higher and higher, and that's not the problem. The problem is that your thread is not actually deep inside the tension disc. So that's just something to check, especially if you have been sewing and then you pull your threads through and then you carry on sewing and suddenly it's not looking good. Then that is what you need to check that your thread is actually in the tension discs, and then you'll actually see, just for interest's sake, at the bottom here I've made a little template of my common thread tension guide, which I can talk about later, and just stuck it on the inside there so I don't have to keep looking at my book. Okay, so I'm going to show you this pull through method with my other machine as well. Okay, so I have tied my blue threads. I'm going to change the thread to navy, so I've tied all my threads and I've pulled them down so that they're all hanging down nicely like that. And I'm just going to show you again my little pull through method, if Milo allows me to, because he's just woken up. So we're going to go onto this machine, and again I want to pull this through nicely. So I'm going to lift my foot up, pull my threads out, and then I'm going to lift my needle up here as well. Okay, so I must have my needles up to get this right. This machine is a bit more difficult because he's got this whole thing at the middle in the way here. So I'm just going to pull this and very gently hold these here, and I'm going to pull so that my threads are now separated. Okay, so on this machine I don't have a lever that I can just pull to fix my tension. So the same thing, I don't want to pull my knots through my tension disc, so I need to put all of these onto naught. So it's quite easy for me to remember what the numbers are now, but say you have your numbers and you've set them up nicely and you're happy with them. So what I'm going to do, just to make it easier for myself, is I'm just going to do 2 at a time. So I'm going to do these 2 first, which are my needle ones. So these ones run through the needle. So I'm going to put these 2 on naught, and I'm going to pull the thread through, and then I'm going to immediately go and put them back onto 3, so before I forget what they were. The same with these ones. I'm going to put them down to naught, pull the threads through, so I can see my blue, and immediately go and put them back onto 4, so that I haven't forgotten what they were. And then all I need to do obviously is thread my needles, because I can't pull the knots through the needles. And again, just check that nothing's jumped out at the top here. You'll see this is where the thread goes in, so just check that nothing has jumped out there. And if you need to, you can open this and actually, like I did with the other machine, hold the thread at the top and the bottom and actually give it a little pull to make sure that it's tightly in the tension discs. And then obviously before you start sewing, just do a little test to make sure that everything is fine and you're good to go with your new color. Okay, so another question I normally get is, where do you put the thread after you've threaded the machine? So basically this one will be underneath the foot, so it mustn't be in front of the blade, it must be coming out the back like that. And then these guys you can thread, you can use a tweezer if you need to, it just makes it a little bit easier. But we thread this guy, and basically you're going to take this thread and I push him behind the blade so that he's also out the back. So all the threads must be under your foot and out the back, just like you would do with a normal sewing machine. Okay, so this guy I'm also going to get around and out like that. Okay, so when you have, just quickly say that one of your threads break while you're busy sewing, or one of your needles break while you're busy sewing, and you need to rethread, it is better to actually get all your threads to be separated again. So undo all your threads. So if you need to do both your needles and then rethread them both, so that when you start sewing, you know that you're going to get that nice chain again. So once something breaks, one of the threads break, rather thread both the needles again before you carry on sewing, not just the one needle and then carry on sewing. Okay, so just showing you that again on this machine. So I've threaded the 2 needles, and I want my thread to go under the foot, so it's going to go, I'm going to push it through here. So basically I'm going to wrap it in between there and then put it like that, so it goes right to the back, so that all the threads are coming out the back like that. Okay, so you're all ready to sew now. So there's different ways of lifting your foot. There is a lever at the back. Some of the machines have them in different places, but this machine, down is up and up is down, so I lift my lever foot. You can also, on the side of the machine where you have your turning wheel thing, this also, like your normal sewing machine, it lifts your needles. Okay, so you can lift your needles up and down if you need to. They don't have to be up or down when you start sewing, but you must have your foot, so like a normal sewing machine, your foot must be down when you start sewing. And I'm going to use the edge of this metal plate here as my guide, and I'm going to keep the fabric on that edge there, so I'm not really cutting it off. I'm just cutting a tiny bit off of, if something is skew, I'll cut a little bit off, so I don't really want to cut anything off. And then, unlike a normal sewing machine, you have to run it all the way off like that until you have a nice tail, and then you're going to cut that. Okay, so just to go through this, what do you do with the threads at the end? So you've cut your thread there, so you're going to cut about 1 centimeter away, and then you're going to pull all your threads. Just kind of pull, 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 and you'll see that it starts making a knot. You normally will get 2 long threads, but if you don't, you just literally just pull like that, and then you've got a bit of a knot at the end there. And then those you can cut off. Okay. Obviously most of the time you are going to sew over the seam, so if this was the bottom of your pants or something, you would still fold this up and sew over that, but that's the best way to end that off like that. If you come to the end like this, don't just cut it right over there, because you'll see that it starts unraveling, your stitches start unraveling. So always cut 1 centimeter away and then pull. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go in to show you how to do a back stitch. Not always necessary, but just so that you know how to do it. Basically, you go to the end, and you're going to stop. So basically you need to stop. Your last stitch must be off the fabric, so don't go more than one stitch off the fabric, just go one stitch off the fabric. You're going to lift your foot up, so lift the pressure foot up, loosen your thread, so just a little bit, you loosen these threads here, and then you take your fabric and you pull it out a little bit, and then you flip the fabric towards yourself and put it back underneath. So I'm pushing it right up to the needles, I'm putting my foot back down, and then I'm going to come off at an angle here. And that is basically a back stitch on your overlocker. So again, with these threads here, you will cut them a centimeter away, pull them all so that they go nice and tight, make a little bit of a knot there, and then cut those off. Okay, so that's how you would end with the back stitch. So if you want to start with a back stitch, you're actually going to start kind of towards the bottom of your fabric. So you're going to put it in like that. We're going to stitch until the end. So you've got, again, your one stitch off the fabric. Lift the foot up, loosen your threads over here. Okay, pull this out, push him, so you're twisting him over, around, so that it's like that, and then you're pushing him back in front of your needles. Okay, and you put your foot back down, and then it is a good idea to just pull these threads back up. So over here, I'm just going to pull those two threads up again, so that they're tight there, so that they're not giving me a little bit of a bulge there. And then I'm going to sew off till the end. So now there's the back stitch that I've started with, the back stitch that I've started with. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to turn around a corner. So you're going to sew until the end of the fabric. Again, stop with your needle, one stitch off the fabric. You can do this by hand, so I'm actually turning my hand wheel on the side of my machine here to get it to just do the one stitch off the fabric, because I don't want to go too far, otherwise it's not going to look nice. So I've got one down and I've got my needles down. Now you're going to lift your foot up, lift your foot, loosen your threads, so you pull these slightly, loosen your threads, and then you take your fabric out the back and gently pull it and swing it around and back in front of your needles. It must be in front of the needles. So if the needles are down, you have a nice guide because you can push the fabric right up to the back there. Then you must put your foot back down and pull your threads back. So you're going to go at the top here. You're going to pull your threads over here. You're going to pull them back up so that you don't have it loose over there anymore, and then you're going to carry on sewing. I'll show you one more time. So you go till the end. Again, I'm using my hand. I'm just going to go, so my last stitch is off the fabric. I lift my foot, loosen my threads, gently pull the fabric out the back, not too far, just a little bit, and swing it around and back in front of the needles. Push it right in front of the needle, put your foot back down and pull your threads back up. So you're pulling these two, so it's your needle threads, you're pulling these two back up, and then you carry on sewing. And then you can see you have two neat corners that don't have loose threads, so your threads are not loose. Okay, so changing the needle. The best needles to use for an overlocker would be your stretch size 90, because they can be used on most fabric, but like normal sewing machine, you can also change your needle. So if you're going to sew a thin fabric, you use a thin needle. If you're going to sew a knit fabric, you use a knit needle. So you can change your needles as per what you would do with your sewing machine. Some overlockers need a special screwdriver, so this screwdriver is specially for this machine. The Bernina just needs a normal tiny screwdriver. So what you will notice with the needles is the one is higher than the other one. So if you look here, this one is slightly higher than that one, which is completely normal. So to take my needles out, I would just take my threads out again, like I would do when I'm changing colors. Let me just move them out the way. And I'd literally just unscrew him like that to take the needle out. Okay, so it's exactly the same as something you would use on your sewing machine. So it's got the flat side at the back, and that you'll push, so you'll put it in exactly the same as a normal sewing machine. It's a little bit tricky, but you push it in and make sure that you're pushing it as high. Okay, so just finished talking about putting the needle back in. So I took the needle out just now, and then my phone died. So basically you put it back in and push it as high as it possibly can go. So this must be as high as it can go. So I like to use my nail just to hold it there. If you don't have a nail, then just do your best to get it as high as it can, and then make this as tight as you can, and then you're good to go. Okay, so let's just quickly look at how to unpick overlocking. I'm trying to use the sample here, which has got the different colors on. Basically, there's two different ways to unpick, and this is the one way. And what you're going to do is you're going to start by unpicking your needle line. So those are the two lines, the yellow and the green ones, which you can't really see on this side. So when you are going to unpick and your threads are all the same color, look for the side, the pretty side, which is the top side. So basically what you're going to do here is you're going to go in and pull your needle thread out. So there I've pulled the yellow one out, and I'm going to pull the green one out. Okay, and then what I do is I go a little bit further down, say 3 or 4 centimeters, and I cut the threads here. So I cut this one and I cut that one, and then I just pull these ones, and then they come out. So pull those out, and then keep going. So I'm going to go and just pull a little bit there so that I've got a little bit of a thread there, so I've got something to hold onto here, and here I can actually just keep going and pull out that yellow, the orange green thread, and then the yellow thread, and then these threads on the side literally just come off like that, and then I've unpicked it. Okay, sometimes you can't pull the threads out like I showed you just now. So if you need to unpick, then the easiest way to do it when the threads don't want to move is to cut these open. So cut these threads like this all the way through. And then you're going to pull this open, and then you need to unpick from the inside these stitches. So there's 2 rows of stitching, so remember you have 2 needles. So cut those ones, unpick these ones. That's the first row, and then you'll see there's the second row coming. So you unpick that row, and then this row. And then it all comes apart. It is the messy way, but sometimes you just can't pull the threads out, and this is the only way to unpick. Okay, so quickly talking about seam allowances. When you sew on an overlocker, the seam allowance is normally about 8 millimeters. And so basically, if you have a pattern and you have cut the pattern out and the pattern has a 1 centimeter seam allowance, you should technically be cutting off 2 mils to make up for the 1 centimeter. If you sew the whole garment just on 8, it will work out a little bit bigger than the pattern has been intended. You'll see sometimes in the overseas videos that they cut off a lot. So as they're sewing, they kind of cut off quite a bit. I find it quite difficult to kind of guide, have a proper guide, because you're basically using guides on here. Some machines have little guides on here. I'll show you on the other machine. And then you can cut off, but to try and cut that off and sew straight at the same time when you have a big piece of fabric is not very efficient. So it is much better just to use the edge of this as a guide, and then you're sewing 8 mils in from that. And then I'll just show you, this is a little bit tricky to explain, but your blade should be in line with this edge here. Okay, so if I've got on the side of my machine, there's a little thing over here that I can move, and that moves the blade. so that it's lining up. So if I move, you can see the whole thing is moving. Actually, there I'm moving the blade away, and there I'm moving closer. So when I sew, I want the blade to be in line with the edge of this. So you just have to test and see how it works. And then another thing you can do, so when you're sewing elastic and stuff and you want the blade to be out the way, I'm opening the machine on the side, and then on the side of my machine over here there is a little button. So when I push this button in, my blade moves. So I'm going to push it in, and you can see the blade's pushing out. So I will just take the blade now and move it down out of the way, and then that way I can sew without the blade. Okay, so on this machine my blade is in a different place. Here is my blade. So if I want to move this blade out the way, I always use two hands. So you've got to push this guy, push him quite hard, and then turn this up so that the blade is now out of the way. Let me just put him back down. So on this machine, when I want to move the position of the blade, I actually need to turn. There's a button in here, this button I need to turn, that moves it. So you can see there the whole blade thing is moving. So again, you just want to try and get the blade, so that you don't cut off too much, the blade in line with this guide. So if that is your guide and you follow that guide through, you want the blade and that to be in line with each other. Okay, so if I do this, then it's going to cut off more than it needs to. So you want to try and keep that inside in the same place. So you'll see that I've got marks here on my machine. So that mark over there is the 1.5. So it's saying that if I sew there, then I will be cutting off the equivalent of having a 1.5 seam allowance. But it is very difficult to keep that as a guide. So keep watching there and make sure that I'm accurately cutting off 1.5, which is why I don't suggest using that as a guide. It's much better to have your fabric cut on the right spot, and then you rather just use this here, this edge as your guide. You can see that I'm sometimes just lifting this with my finger, which you can literally just put that in, because once that is in, even just a little bit in, the machine will pull it in to sew it. So lastly, I'm just going to say, when you're sewing with an overlocker, you shouldn't pin your fabric, because you can cut your pins, so it is quite dangerous. If you definitely have to pin the fabric, then you're going to pin them from the side. So you'll put your pins in like that and like that, so that if you do accidentally cut them or get close to the blade, you're not actually going to cut them because they're out the way. And then the last thing is to clean your machine. So this one I have cleaned just a little bit before I started the videos, but they do get very full of lint and they get very dirty quite easily, so you can clean them. The best is to just take some sort of brush and brush them out, or if it's really, really bad, you can take all your threads out and actually vacuum inside. But it is very good to, if you can, oil and clean your machine as you work with it.